all that from watching interviews.
And also the suppression of arguments about gender and, and sex, what is biological sex and whatnot. You get banned for saying there are two sexes.
They're on the wrong side of this, and now he's correcting. But the weird thing is the people, of course, the people who don't like this, the lefties, this person, Vessa, is saying that this is a big problem. That it's an extremely dangerous time. I've seen all this from the lefties. They just call it disinformation. They're worried about this because to them it's disinformation. To other people it's information.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we can all agree if people think they're getting their facts just directly from Facebook, then something's horribly wrong. But we know that. The community notes thing, I think, is quite good because that sort of first-hand experience people are putting down, aren't they?
Yeah. People have loads of different views come together, and it's an aggregate, so that's why it works.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. We're speaking to lots of great guests on today's show, including the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. I'm going to be asking her about the Southport killing. I'm going to be asking her why she thinks the government's new education reforms are an act of vandalism, and indeed what she makes of Trump's inauguration this week. Also joining me today is the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. He's going to be in the studio when we've got yet more statistics which suggest that the economy is flailing. What's his response? Also, what does he make of claims that calling the Chancellor Rachel from accounts is sexist? I'll also be speaking to Zia Youssef. He's the chairman of Reform UK. He's been hugely critical of the Prime Minister's handling of the Southport killings. We'll get his answers to some of the questions on that subject, which I know is one that's close to all of your hearts. I'll also be speaking to the Conservative MP for East Wiltshire, Danny Kruger. He's participated in a report which suggests that we're over-medicalising with antidepressants, conditions that are just a sign of everyday life. Are we giving too many drugs out for people simply suffering from anxiety? And ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking to Wendy Holden, the author of a new book about a really remarkable story of survival over adversity in Auschwitz. So, as ever, we've got 90 minutes of very punchy politics ahead. Do not even think of going anywhere. Matthew Laza joins me now to go through the morning papers. There's a lot to go at. What a week in news it's been. The inauguration, Prince Harry settling with Rupert Murdoch, everything that's gone on with Rudy Cabana. And let's start with that. I don't want to mention him too much. Let's just call him the Southport killer from here on in, because part of this was about his quest, I think, for notoriety.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Sunday Times has tried to unpick exactly what went wrong, and it's got access to some of the paperwork around this.
Yes.
What have they discovered?
So the Sunday Times has seen a redacted version of the review into what the Northwest Prevent, that's the anti-terrorism programme to which people are referred, and then it assesses how much of a risk they are. It's seen a redacted version of that report, which included endless opportunities for action to be taken, which wasn't. He was actually referred 3 times, and the serious failings included he was sent, released from after his first meeting from the Prevent programme. 3 days later, he was waving a baseball bat at a fellow pupil. So
it was a hockey stick as well.
It's a hockey stick, sorry.
That's
no, but
right,
but what Yvette Cooper's done, the Home Secretary, she's written for the Sunday Times, and there are 3 key things I think they want to change, that they're saying they want to change in light of these very serious failings. One is to review the referral threshold for Prevent, so that actually effectively lowering it so that more people get referred. Now, that sounds like a good idea, but you need people within within the Prevent programme who have got the capacity to do that. So there'll be question marks about whether there is enough capacity within the Prevent programme. It's not like you can just suddenly whistle up people with expertise and the ability to assess these cases just like that. Interestingly, neurodivergence, a sort of word which encompasses a lot of things like autism, ADHD, etc., is no longer a reason to will no longer be a reason to stop investigation.
Why should it have been?
Well, I'm not sure why it should have been in the first place, but I mean...
It doesn't matter whether somebody's got autism or ADHD. If they've got violent tendencies of carrying knives and threatening children, phoning Childline and saying they want to kill someone...
Yes, exactly. And so, I mean, in fact, one of the things that we might come on to talk about is how the Southport killer had sort of obsessed with mass killings and genocide in different ways.
Let's just talk about that now, because The Sun's got this headline, Library of Hate. And the thing that's happened here, Matthew, is that Prevent doesn't seem to have been able to determine which ideologies he was following or whether one of them influenced him more than the other. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the Al-Qaeda manual that he downloaded and was this inspired by, you know, ISIS or Islamic fundamentalism in any way, even though his parents were church-going Christians. He was accessing a lot of extremely dodgy material. Just list some.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was looking at stuff about the ethnic cleansing in Somalia, about the war in Sri Lanka, as well as stuff about the Second World War. He had in total 164,000 documents. And I think that's what happened is that because it wasn't like he was just reading about Islamic terrorism or just reading about the Second World War, that they thought we can put you in a box and say you're in danger because of this.
But
so they dismissed it because it was so broad brush.
I know, but do you think as well this idea that, oh, he was only just interested, he had a fascination with world affairs. It might have also been a reflection of the autism diagnosis. Oh, this is a kid that, like, really hyper-focuses. Hang on, you're missing the point. He kept on carrying knives, and his teachers and his parents said, this guy is a risk to society.
I think that's absolutely... I think one of the reasons is they thought, oh, he's looking at everything, he's just, you know, it's autism, he's just soaking up every detail from... it's just an interest, a hyperfixation, as you say. It's not a danger. And the third thing, so I think that's why they want to make this change, that neurodivergence is no longer a factor to stop the investigations. And then, and I think this is probably the most important, is what they want to do is tackle the void that they see, that if you go into the Prevent programme, you're assessed and you're not regarded as a terrorism threat sort of at the highest level, so therefore you sort of fall out of the programme. At the moment people go into a void and social services and others aren't really stepping in. There's no mechanism for the two to talk to each other in quite the right way.
He's just fallen through cracks.
Absolutely. And that's what's happened. So those are the three changes that are being flagged by the government.
OK, let's move on to Rachel Reeves. She's on the front of the Telegraph. She wants to have a reboot.
Yes, on the front of the papers because she wants to get on the front foot. Yes. Having had weeks of being battered by bad news, and so she's giving a major speech on Wednesday in which she and in the trail in this, she says that she will not tolerate blockers to her reforms, and these are particularly reforms on planning, but she won't reform them for either party.
Does that mean she won't tolerate Sadiq Khan, who wants to block Heathrow expansion?
Well, that is the big question. I think that this briefing that we've had today is basically a subtle, or maybe not so subtle, message to Sadiq Khan and perhaps my old boss Ed Miliband in sitting around her own cabinet table.
How do you think Ed's doing, Matt?
Well, I think the big question for Ed is as the world, as the focus on his agenda decreases, and we've seen actually some stories today saying it's not just Trump, but actually in Japan as well. There's a kind of defocusing away from what some would say is the obsession with net zero. He would say is the laudable goal of net zero. So, I mean, will Ed be a casualty of the first reshuffle? I think is one of the questions we're going to start seeing.
Didn't Ed Miliband threaten to resign under Gordon Brown should the Heathrow expansion go ahead? Now he's saying, hell no, I'm not going anywhere.
I'm staying here.
May I just suggest that this is Marxism but Groucho? Here are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others.
I'm quite enjoying the job, so I don't really want to go. So I think that this is going to be a sort of continuing theme, and in fact ideological divides within the cabinet are not just on the matters to do with the environment and to do with planning and unleashing the economy, as Rachel would see it, but they're also stretching to the education bill, which is actually I think a growing story.
Well, shall we get onto that now, actually?
Yes, absolutely.
I was just going to say one thing about WHSmith.
Of course.
The WHSmith story, when we don't quite know what's happening, there's talk about 500 shops being closed down if they can't be taken over.
It's the high street stores because they want to concentrate on their travel
really badly.
stores.
I mean, any sitting government, when a major brand like WHSmith closes up shop, it just is a bad reflection, even if it might not be Labour's fault. It might hark back to the Tory government. But this idea of our high streets being in jeopardy reflects really badly on the Chancellor, I think.
Absolutely. Actually, I think with WHSmith, to be fair to the government, it's mostly the changing nature of retail. You remember that Twitter feed which was on WHSmith, state of WHSmith stores, and people put the holes in the carpet and the lights not being on. So the business has been in decline for some time, but of course people are going to pin this on the government's actions, like the national insurance rise for employers. And they're also, of course, whatever happens, whatever the cause, if you're in your 500 high streets up and down the country, that's almost one per constituency across the country. You've got another empty shop in prime locations on your high street. It's going to add to that sense of decline that people feel about their own communities, even if it's not the government's fault. So that's a big issue for them.
Let's get on to education, and then we'll look at this survey, which is suggesting that most people in the country want Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister. Education, education, education. This is about Bridget Phillipson's, what's it called, the Child Being and...
It's called the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill.
Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, and it's been heavily criticised by Kemi Badenoch, who's coming on the show a little later. She's called it an act of educational vandalism because it's taking away the autonomy of academy schools. They quote Lord Harris there, who's a major Labour donor. He was a Tory donor, then he became a Labour donor. He is the architect of academisation to many extents and purposes. God, he must be regretting giving all that money to Labour.
He's certainly is expressing serious concern about it. So he said he was one of the pioneers of academies. He's from Peckham in South London, and every time I go past his academy on the bus, I think about, you know, it's one of the best schools in London. It's massively oversubscribed, and he talks today in the papers about one he did in Tottenham, where David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was opposed to it. This is when...
long-standing Labour MP for Tottenham.
Labour MP for Tottenham for his local patch. And so what's basically happened is that this bill, amongst other things, as you say, reduces the autonomy of academies, which was seen as by many as one of the great successes of the Blair government, the education mantra that was one of the things that got Blair into power. And this reduces their autonomy, things like their ability to set pay rates that are different from national scales to attract teachers. And there seems
they can deviate away from the national curriculum, and that's important because we've currently got a review that Labour is carrying out, which is suggesting that they might scrap Latin. Now, if you've got pupils that are interested in Latin and you're running an academy, you have, up until this point, more freedom to do those sorts of subjects.
I have to say, I've forgotten his name, but I found this week there's a Labour MP whose job before he went in, one of the unexpected winners, whose job before he went in was to campaign for state school kids to be able to do Latin.
Really?
Absolutely.
That's turning out well for him. At least you found a Labour MP with a job before.
So what's happened with this bill is, as you say, because it restricts the ability of academies to do their own thing, this is now creating not just a divide between Labour and the Tories, but it's also creating a divide within Labour. Some of the sort of Blairite wing, people who regarded it as one of their legacy, and that includes lots of people who are around in Number 10 and around the current government, they are saying that actually, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? And so, I mean, I've heard some Labour MPs this week, did Number 10 even read the bill?
No, that's right.
And I think that, so the question now is not only about the issue, but about is Number 10 getting a good enough grip
So is this the thing to do? We've got, the Tories are not associated with many successes over the last 14 years, not least on immigration and tax. However, on education, they did drive standards up, not down. So it's like, to pick on education, also the link between the National Education Union and some of these reforms is interesting. It's Daniel Kabidi, I think, is the chief executive of the NEU right now. And he's been very vocal on this idea that academies are there's this narrative running through it that this has been motivated by kind of left-wing dogma, along with the private schools VAT thing. This is about punishing people that want to go their own way.
Absolutely. So the old charge on Labour before Blair was that all Labour said on education was whatever was then the National Union of Teachers. It's now called the National Education Union. Whatever they said, literally cut and pasted, as it were, from their policy documents. And then, of course, when you had David Blunkett as Education Secretary, he would go and get... Do you remember when he got... He was sort of besieged at one of the Teachers Union conferences before he got into government. The big fear now is that you're seeing a turn back of the clock, and that Labour's going back to doing what the teacher unions want. And the big problem with that is Bridget Phillipson was perceived, the Education Secretary was perceived as a rising star of the modern wing of the party. There was even talk of her becoming leader at one point, or even deputy leader if Angela Rayner had to stand down. And now people are saying, crikey, I'm not sure whether we're allowed to use the phrase gone native, but has she basically gone into hock of the education unions? Because actually large swathes of the Labour Party don't like that. So watch this space for this row developing.
I think you were going to say gone into hockey, because of course she was spotted at a private school's facilities using private schools.
For the parliamentary hockey team.
Really, really, really quickly, because I think James Murray, the Treasury Minister, is about to come into the studio. Let's just pick one stat from this poll in the Mail on Sunday, which is by, who's done the polling? Lord Ashcroft, former Tory Treasurer. Who could make the best Prime Minister, the public is asked? Oh, it's actually, to be fair, Keir Starmer comes out on top, 31%. Kemi Badenoch, 11. Nigel Farage, 21.
I mean, I think
As I've got Badenoch coming in, what should I say to
well, I mean, I think you should just say that it's not happening, and if you don't make an impact in your first 100 days, then you're not going to cut through. I mean, that is, I think, the opportunity.
Yeah, the other thing, sorry, this is the killer one. Who is acting as the most effective opposition? Kemi Badenoch, 14%. Nigel Farage, 26%. No effective opposition gets 27%, so no one is better than both Farage and Badenoch.
But at least Farage is beating Badenoch.
All right.
Pleasure.
Matthew Laza, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning to go through the papers. And up next, as I say, James Murray, I can just see him coming in here. We'll be back in just a jiffy, and I'll be interviewing I think he's called the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. So basically, Rachel Reeves is right-hand man. Don't go anywhere.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's plenty of sunshine on offer for many over the next couple of days in Europe, but there is some heavy rain as well, particularly for parts of Portugal, northern Spain, northwestern parts of France, and some blustery westerly winds as well continuing throughout Monday. Further east, though, there is plenty of sunshine on offer for southern parts of Italy, Greece, Cyprus, seeing plenty of sunshine throughout Monday afternoon. Temperatures here generally in the mid to high teens, with the highest temperatures likely across Tenerife, where we'll see temperatures around 22 or 23.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Jonathan, in London, we're hearing that there could be more posties from an Amazon point of view in order to limit or cut carbon emissions, but that they could put more people on foot delivering their parcels.
This is really interesting because more and more people now obviously are using Amazon and buying their shopping online or buying gifts online. And it's interesting that in London they're talking about putting their Amazon workers on foot. There are now parts of the country, I think Milton Keynes is one part of the country, where there's robots delivering parcels, or you'll see these. Well, they call them robots. You'll see these little things sort of bundling down the street.
Yes,
sort of
robots.
Yeah, I mean, technically they're a robot, but when I think of a robot, I think of a sort of
a humanoid robot.
Yeah, sort of humanoid thing, sort of Lost in Space style robot. But actually, they're sort of little sort of carriages, little
droids,
boxes,
like Star Wars droid type.
Well, they're not even that. They're like a little sort of like a box on wheels, delivering parcels in places like Milton Keynes and other bits of the country. So I think this is just another example of how the world is changing. Online shopping is completely changing the way in which we all live our lives, the way things.
But I think Milton Keynes lends itself to something like that. This is a newly designed town, and
exactly that's why they're in Milton Keynes.
And I really do think that a town like that really does lend itself towards a piece of tech like that. When I think back, our postie in Gloucestershire is a guy called Dave. He's fantastic. Everyone knows who he is. But I'm not sure that he could be replaced by one of these little droid things.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, joins me in the studio now. Lovely to see you in the flesh.
Good morning.
Because we normally talk down the line. Let's get started. We're going to talk about Southport in just a minute, but let's just start with what you're announcing today. And this is about more houses near commuter train stations. So you're talking again about, you know, cutting red tape, building properties. We know that the Chancellor is going to make an announcement on Wednesday when we think she's going to lean into Heathrow expansion. Can you give us a time frame on any of this stuff? Because in all my time as a journalist, I hear a lot about cutting of red tape and infrastructure projects. But when will houses be built? If you do expand Heathrow, when's the deadline? Give us a bit of timing on all this.
Sure. So part of what the Chancellor is setting out today is around our desire to unshackle planning, to unclog the system, to make sure planning decisions get taken quicker and homes get built. Because one of the things in our plan for change, one of the things we were elected on, is about getting homes built. It's about driving economic growth. And I think, you know, like you said, you will have heard numerous governments in recent years talk about planning change, but then it doesn't get delivered. And actually, if you look at what the Chancellor has done, soon after taking office, she scrapped the ban on onshore wind turbines, you know, and again we're coming back to make planning quicker and easier and more pro-growth.
So how long does it take now, for instance, an average planning application, and how much do you want to speed it up by?
So if you look at what we're proposing, the bill which is going to come in this spring and then go through Parliament as quickly as possible, will introduce what we're calling brownfield passports. And what that means is that if you're proposing a development on brownfield land, including some of the land near railway stations, and there's a presumption in favour of development there, there's an assumption that the answer will be yes if it meets key criteria.
Okay. But can you give us a timing, like how quickly do you want the process to go from found a brownfield, there's a house built?
Yeah, well, we want every stage of the process to speed up. At the moment, if you look at major planning applications...
I know, but you're not giving me a time. Like, how quickly do you want it to happen? Because it's all very well talking about red tape, we're going to do this, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
By when?
Yeah, well, I can give you the timescale of 13 weeks. How long it takes is the statutory length of time which is supposed to be allowed to determine major planning applications. Recently, only about 20% of applications have been decided within that timeframe, and we want to significantly increase that.
If we look at some of the latest economic data, it doesn't make for great reading for the Treasury or indeed the government. Lower manufacturing production, got new work falling at the fastest pace since October 2023. Prices have increased at the fastest level for 18 months in January. Employment has fallen for 4 months. This is all since the budget, so it can't really be blamed on 14 years of Tory rule. It's not a great indictment, is it, of the way that Labour is running the economy?
Well, what the headlines like that underscore for me is how important it is that we go further and faster to boost economic growth. And that is why we are relentless about this. And we will be doing everything we possibly can to get growth to increase.
Growth isn't increasing, that's the problem.
Well, if you look at what the IMF and the OECD have said recently, they've set out that we will be growing at a fast rate over the coming years. And if you look at what PwC said, for instance, we're the second best investment location in the world, only after the US. So there is cause for optimism. But
I know, but the actual figures aren't looking particularly positive. In fact, some economics experts think that we might actually go into recession. So if we go into recession, what does that say about Rachel Reeves' growth pledge?
Well, all of the headlines say to me, we need to go further and faster to boost growth. And that's why what the Chancellor setting out today
what will happen if we go into recession, James Murray?
Well, we don't want that to happen. We want economic growth to be boosted. And
Could it happen, though?
What we want to do as a government is make sure economic growth is as strong as possible, and that's why we're doing all these changes.
Could you actually go into recession? You've promised all of this growth. The figures look dire. What happens if we go into recession? Would Rachel Reeves then have to consider her position?
Well, look, the Chancellor has a plan to get the economy growing. Part of our plan for change is about boosting economic growth, and that's why we are so determined to focus on the changes we need to make.
I know you're determined, but let me put it this way. Are you ruling out a recession, or do you think we could go into recession over the course of the next 12 months?
Well, no, we want the economy to grow fast. Well, I'm not...
I want you to answer my question. Are you ruling out a recession here on the show?
Well, I can't predict everything that's going to happen over the next 5 years. What I can say is what we will do as a government.
I'm just saying in the next 6 months. By the end of the year, will we definitely grow, or could we go into recession? Are you able to rule a recession out?
Well, I can't predict the future, but what I can do...
You can't rule out a recession, even though you're putting all of your economic hopes on growth. And the Chancellor Rachel Reeves is promising growth at every different turn.
But
if you don't achieve it, it will be a failure.
What we know is that there are economic headwinds affecting the UK. But that, for me, underscores the importance of us going further and faster.
But these economic headwinds are all since January. They're all since the budget. Meanwhile, we hear that millionaires are leaving every 45 minutes. So how has the budget improved this growth plan? I don't understand. All of the economic markers are pointing in the opposite direction to the one Rachel Reeves wants to go in.
So what the budget did was reset the public finances, get public services back on their feet, and deliver that economic stability which we need for businesses to invest. Now, look, I meet businesses day in, day out in my job, and I know that businesses want to invest. We have amazing British businesses, British entrepreneurs who want to create jobs and wealth across the country. But they need economic stability to make that investment.
Yeah, but I'm saying that these figures are saying the opposite of what you're saying. Manufacturing's down, new work has fallen, prices have increased, employment has gone down over the last 4 months. And meanwhile, we've got millionaires leaving every 45 minutes. So I don't understand how you can categorise this as a success so far. Well, these figures suggest failure.
Well, look at some of the other figures which we know are true, which is that wages have been growing the fastest in 3 years, an extra £20 a week.
In the public sector, because you've given them pay rises?
Across the piece. That's wages across the piece growing the fastest they have in 3 years. We know that the UK is now, according to PwC, the second best investment location in the world.
Okay, but what about these figures? Why is manufacturing down? Why are prices up? And why has employment fallen? And why are millionaires leaving the country every 45 minutes? I know you want to pick your own figures, but these figures suggest that the budget's gone really badly wrong.
What the budget did was reset the public finances, but what those headlines say
seem to suggest that they haven't reset the public finances, they've made them worse.
What the headlines say to me is that we need to go further and faster in boosting economic growth, and that is why we're so determined to make these changes to planning, to all of the things that get in the way of growth, because we know that the way to get out of the situation we're in is to get the economy growing.
And yet, Rachel Reeves wants to be known as the Iron Chancellor. Is that credible? I mean, she's making comparisons between herself and Margaret Thatcher.
I think the comparison that you're alluding to is about some of the difficult decisions that Rachel has taken since taking office, and no one can doubt the fact that she's prepared to take difficult decisions. We've seen a number of difficult decisions she took last year. But I think what's important also to realise is there are the right decisions which have been ducked for too long. So there have been decisions that we've needed to take.
So it's OK to make the right decisions even if it means that the economy will suffer?
No, some of the decisions we need to take...
According to these figures?
Some of the decisions we need to take are about getting the economy growing. So if you look at the decisions...
How does millionaires leaving the country in their droves help the economy to grow? Millionaires pay quite a lot in tax, don't they?
Well, what we did in the budget is to scrap the non-dom tax status.
But non-doms pay tax. They pay tax on the UK earnings. It's a confusion here by the government between non-doms and non-citizens. You want non-doms to pay tax, don't you? You want non-doms to pay tax on the UK earnings. There seems to be this fallacy that non-doms don't pay tax. They do.
The reforms are about foreign income and gains and overseas assets. And what we are replacing the system with is an internationally competitive regime where people won't pay any tax on foreign income and gain for 4 years or inheritance tax for 10.
James Murray, I need to wrap there. Sorry, I was going to ask you about Southport. We'll have to get to the next guests on that particular subject. James Murray, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Coming up next, we're going to be speaking to Kemi Badenoch and Danny Kruger. Don't go anywhere, because there's lots more to come on the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And then fashionistas are keen to see which new trends are set to hit the catwalk.
Well, our next guest is very well placed to share her predictions with us after being a contestant on hit ITV series Dress the Nation, as well as being an upcycling and sewing consultant.
Wow. Joining us now is Tendai Murewe. I want to go back to you appearing on the ITV Dress the Nation.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like?
Oh, that was one of my highlights as a
upcycling consultant. I learned to sew in my kitchen 5 years ago. And then, during COVID, just making masks. Then the next thing I was on a destination, making dresses in front of TV. Yeah, it was just incredible. I think we all had all these clothes that we have, but we don't know what to do with them. So mainly I started with men's jackets, taking off the sleeves and putting it like a print on.
I've tried this. I've tried taking off my sleeves before. I now have about 3 jackets with no sleeves. I never managed to put them back on.
You need to come to a workshop. You need to come to a workshop.
I need an upcycling consultant. 2025, what can we expect fashion-wise?
I think bold prints are back. People are loving. I think you walk on the streets in frollals and oversized men's jackets.
So the exact opposite. We have drastically underperformed this morning. You're just saying not like us.
We just woke up this morning and thought it's winter, it's cold, it's grey.
Grey, miserable.
Is that not the way to go?
No, it is. I think because fashion is expressive. It's whatever you want to express yourself.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. We've got Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch coming up. What does she think of Sir Keir Starmer and his handling of the Southport killings? What does he think the biggest mistake the Prime Minister has made in all of this? I'm also going to be joined by someone who's been extremely critical of Starmer when it comes to Southport, and that's the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef. I'll be asking him also about a national poll that puts Reform on top. Apparently it puts Reform on 26, the Tories on 23 and Labour on 22. Not looking great. I'm also going to be speaking to the Conservative MP Danny Kruger. He'll be here to discuss whether too many people are taking antidepressants to cope with the everyday challenges of life. And ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow, journalist and author Wendy Holden will be revealing the incredible story behind her latest book, The Teacher of Auschwitz. But first, here's your news headlines with Sophia Wendler.
Camilla, thank you. Good morning. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Donald Trump has said he thinks Sir Keir Starmer has done a very good job thus far and said the pair will speak over the phone in the next 24 hours. The US President said he and the Prime Minister get along well, despite Sir Keir Starmer being Liberal, which she said is a little bit different from me. Mr Trump told reporters on Air Force One that his first international trip could be to the UK or Saudi Arabia, the first country he travelled to as president during his first term. Sir Keir most recently met with Mr Trump at Trump Towers in New York during the presidential campaign. The Home Office missed several opportunities to identify the Southport child killer Axel Rudakabana as a terror threat. A review has found Rudakabana was referred to an anti-extremism programme 3 times, according to the Sunday Times newspaper. It also revealed his obsession with mass shootings was dismissed by counter-terrorism officers as interest in world news and that he was not in danger of being radicalised. Meanwhile, the Home Secretary has warned tech companies terrorist material viewed by Rudakabana could inspire another atrocity unless they take action. Yvette Cooper has written to X, Meta, TikTok, Google and YouTube, calling on them to urgently review material accessed by the Southport killer, which is still available online. Rudakabana easily downloaded an Al-Qaeda training manual and watched graphic footage of a terrorist knife attack before he killed 3 young girls. In other news, Israel has prevented thousands of displaced Palestinians from returning home to northern Gaza after accusing Hamas of breaching the ceasefire deal. This comes after Hamas released 4 Israeli female soldiers and Israel freed 200 Palestinian prisoners. But the Israeli government said Palestinians would not be allowed to travel north until plans were in place for the release of Israeli civilian Arbel Yehud. According to the deal, Hamas was to release civilians before soldiers. More strong winds and heavy rain are on the way after Storm Eowyn was dubbed the strongest storm to hit the UK in 10 years, with wind gusts of up to 100 miles per hour. Around 100,000 in Northern Ireland and 35,000 in Scotland are still without power. Some will have to wait several days to be reconnected. Meanwhile, travel services remain severely disrupted in Scotland, with trains and ferries suspended and roads closed. And it's not over yet. The Spanish-named storm Hermenia is on the way and will bring heavy rain, gales and hail snow up from the southwest on Sunday and on Monday. And Elon Musk has made a surprise appearance at a campaign event for Germany's right-leaning AfD, where he urged supporters to move past their guilt. Speaking via video link to a hall of around 4,500 Alternative für Deutschland supporters, the tech billionaire said they are the best hope for Germany.
It's okay to be proud to be German. This is a very important principle, it's okay. It's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Camilla.
Thank you, Sophia. Lots more still to come on the show today. Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch will be here in the studio, as will the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef, and ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow, the journalist and author Wendy Holden will be talking about her new book, The Teacher of Auschwitz. But first, the Conservative MP for East Wiltshire, Danny Kruger, joins me now. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr. Kruger. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Really interesting report by the Centre for Social Justice think tank, suggesting that 84% of GPs think that they're over-prescribing antidepressants for what they describe as sort of everyday anxieties. Stunning statistic in this, that over the last 12 years, antidepressant prescriptions have almost doubled in England, from 47 million in 2011 to 89 million in 2023. What do you think's going on here?
Well, thanks for highlighting this, Camilla. While we all worry about, the sort of things that make the news, underneath, there's this epidemic of overprescription and prescribed drug addiction that we're seeing. And I think the causes of it are complex, but the few of them are doctors being so pressed for time, people being desperate for an immediate solution to their anxiety or whatever other condition they have. And it's so much easier to prescribe a pill. The pharmaceutical companies, I think, make exaggerated claims about the effectiveness of these drugs and don't emphasize enough the downsides. And we've seen some absolutely tragic cases recently, and going back many years, but it's becoming more highlighted recently, of people taking their own lives because of the appalling stress that these drugs seem to induce in people who are in a bad way anyway. So we have a problem with people not being prescribed drugs that they probably shouldn't be on in the first place, but also when they do go on them, they're only supposed to go on them temporarily. And the NHS doesn't provide enough support for people who need to withdraw from these prescribed drugs. So there is an epidemic of distress, and I'm afraid to say this culture of prescribing drugs all the time is making it worse.
Also, I don't want to minimise at all from people with serious mental health complaints. Depression is an awful thing, and in many cases it does need to be medicalised. But have we got into the habit of seeing the everyday stresses and strains of life as something medical when it's just life? I mean, we talk about anxiety, for instance. I don't think there's a time where I prepare for a live TV show every Sunday and don't feel anxious and stressed. That's just a part and parcel of the job. And yet, in some cases, it seems that we're giving antidepressants out for people suffering with those kind of mild anxieties.
Yes. So, I think the problem is coming sort of from both ends, as it were. I do think there is a rise in genuine distress in the population. We have more people just not in a good way. And that's kind of modern life. It's family breakdown. It's the pressures of the economy. We just have a more precarious, more anxious society, I think, than we're used to. There's obviously huge benefits we've gained as well with modernity, but modernity is bringing its stresses. Then at the other end, yes, we've got a culture in which it should be possible to have a quick fix for everything. And you go to you don't feel well, you go to a doctor, you ask them to fix it for you, rather than recognizing that a lot of the causes of the distress that we feel, whether it's anxiety, depression, really is best met by social solutions. So that's being part of a supportive community. It's taking part in physical activities, really good for the mind. It's feeling you have purpose in your life. Again, things that the modern economy often strips away from people. So I do think there's a wide sort of social economic reforms, the real answer to our problems. But in more directly, we just need to give people the opportunities to take part in purposeful, sociable, constructive activity that gives them a sense that there's more to life than whatever stress they're feeling in the day-to-day.
At the extreme end of the wedge, and we've been reminded of it this week, Mr. Kruger, we've seen Axel Rudakabana's Southport killings played out in court. The most horrific and distressing details I think I've ever had to cover in my 20-odd-year career. And at that end, there doesn't seem to be a safety network for young people motivated by extreme and violent ideologies, but also clearly suffering from some kind of mental health disorder. Yeah. What's your reaction to what we've heard this week at Liverpool Crown Court?
Well, outside politics, I run a charity working in prisons and with ex-prisons and youth at risk. And again, the mental health, the degree of sort of genuine distress, getting quite towards psychosis in many cases, I'm afraid is rife. So we do have a massive problem with many, many young people, actually very dangerous. And we saw that with this case. And yes, you're right. What seemed to happen is that the system was only interested in a sort of tick box system of identifying particular ideological terrorism. And because he didn't quite fit the boxes, he wasn't referred to any sort of agency that could either help him or frankly monitor him properly, make sure that he was kept under surveillance, which is what he should have been. So I do think we need different levels, from the most sort of basic for all of us needing more purposeful, more social activity, more psychotherapy available through schools and so on, right up to more, frankly, surveillance of the most dangerous people who are psychotic. It's a very, very difficult ask because we don't want the state to be intrusive and poking around in everybody's lives the whole time. How we manage this in the context of what we want to be a free society is very, very difficult. But yeah, I'm afraid we do have massive challenges that as a society we need to rise to, as this case demonstrates.
You've been an advocate in the past of a smaller state and parents taking more responsibility. It's a difficult question, this, because I appreciate the Southport killers' parents now are in hiding and their life has been changed beyond all recognition. But there is a debate going on in the UK about how much blame should be attributed to them. Do you have a view on that?
Well, like you say, I don't think it's appropriate to comment on that case until we understand more about what happened. But, my very obvious insight is that we're all the product of our family upbringing. And I think the great challenge we have as a society is to create more stable families. If we want a smaller state, if we want to cut taxes, if we want to have more personal responsibility, we need to have more strong support around us as individuals. And that really is about family. So we need to be doing more about parenting. And I think there's a lot that can be done to create more stable family units, make it easier for couples to stay together and to do their job of bringing up children well. And we know no idea what went wrong in this case, but more generally, it's usually separated parents that are the parents of criminals that I deal with.
I mean, in this case, the parents were together. They were God-fearing, church-going people. But I appreciate maybe this is something that should be uncovered by the public inquiry. Can I just move you on very briefly to assisted dying? Because I know you're against the legislation that's currently being considered in Parliament. We've now got the committee that's been convened to have a look at the assisted dying bill being accused of a stitch-up. We've got disability campaigners saying they've been frozen out. We've got the Royal College of Psychiatrists saying they've been frozen out. Are you concerned about how this legislation is being assessed?
I am. I mean, just to be fair and correct the record, the Royal College of Psychiatrists now have been included after pressure from me and others. There are some representatives of disabled people's groups on we're taking evidence from, but not the groups themselves that are campaigning against it. And overall, yes, I'm concerned that the witness list is heavily skewed towards people who are supportive of the legislation, including all the people from abroad telling us about how it works in other countries are all in favour of assisted dying. So, but listen, the process is the process. It's what it is. It's designed by the member who's supporting the bill because she won the second reading vote, so she's now in charge. That's how it is. I just hope we have a really good debate, when we're taking evidence and also when we get to the scrutiny of the actual clauses, which will begin next week, that we can genuinely highlight the dangers and see if we can possibly strengthen the safeguards that I think are very, very weak in the bill. And if we can't, then I hope that MPs will reject the whole thing at the end. OK. Danny Kruger, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Do urge you to check out that report by the CSJ, the Centre for Social Justice, on over-medicalisation of everyday anxieties. Well, still to come, I'm going to be speaking to the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. She's going to be here in the studio. But first, I'm going to be speaking to the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef, who has actually been quite critical of Kemi Badenoch on transgenderism in the last few days. So we'll be asking them both about that. Don't go anywhere. Be back in a jiffy. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
According to a report from the RAC, many drivers see speed limits as a target rather than anything else. More than 50% of us think it's acceptable to break the speed limit.
So this morning we're asking, is it time to increase the motorway speed limit?
Let's talk to automotive journalists Danny Kelly and Steve Fowler. Gents, what a pleasure to speak to you both in one go.
I think we should join many countries in the European Union that have 130 kilometres speed limit, which is around about 81 miles an hour. I drive to London on a weekly basis, and I think the roads are capable of handling higher speeds. I think unofficially the speed limit, without getting pulled over by the local police at the time, is probably around about 78, 80 miles an hour. If a Bobby's on the motorway doing 70 miles an hour, he wants you to overtake him. He wants the free-flowing of that motorway to continue.
So should we change 70 miles an hour? You know, if people are going 80 miles an hour, just stick to 70 miles an hour as a limit. Yes, you know, it's funny when you're driving along the motorway and there's a police car going at 70 and nobody wants to overtake. But if the average is 80, just leave it at 70.
All the gantries now are fitted with the modern signage where they can change the limit at will. We all know that. It's hard to get up to 70 half the time. So, actually, we could apply those rules, couldn't we, at 80 or even 90 miles an hour and say, well, if the weather's bad, let's reduce it. If the fog's bad, let's reduce it.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I hate to use this phrase, smart motorways, but they're the ones where you have the adjustable limits. They don't cover all of the motorway network, relatively small amount of the motorway network. It is a limit. You know, it's not a target, as I keep saying to my kids. God, they're bored of me saying that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. With me now in the studio is the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef. Lovely to see you. How are you?
Very well, Camilla. How are you?
Fine, thanks. You've just come back from Washington, D.C., because you were at the inauguration. We'll get onto that in just a minute. Can we talk about Southport first? Because you, Reform, Nigel Farage and others have been very vocal about this. You have accused the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of deliberate, premeditated lies over the Southport killer. What exactly do you mean? What are these deliberate, premeditated lies?
Everybody watching this at home, it is absurd on its face that the Prime Minister of this country would not have known almost immediately about the ricin, about the Al-Qaeda materials that have been downloaded to this monster's computer, the materials he had been studying. So to say that it wasn't being treated as a terror incident. And then, by the way, the consequences of this, Camilla, lies are as serious as the consequences they cause in many ways. People have gone to jail actually, for spreading, quote, misinformation that in the passage of time has transpired to be true.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage, I was in the room when he recorded the video in which he was the only political leader in this country to ask the correct questions. He asked, was this person potentially on some kind of list? We now know he was referred to Prevent on 3 separate occasions. Yeah. Prevent failed to take any appropriate action and, frankly, allowed this monster to carry out this atrocity.
Was this being probed because there were feelings that he may have been linked to Islamic extremism? Or do you accept that he was looking at a lot of different ideologies? What was that initially about? Because I think if people wanted to make the link, we had a lot of inflamed tensions at the time of the Southport riots. Claims were being made about him that weren't true. We had that whole scenario where people were saying that he was an illegal immigrant. Obviously, this is a British-born child to Rwandan immigrant parents. He's born in Cardiff. He then moves to Southport. There is a link, as you say, to Al-Qaeda. But one of the problems for Prevent, it seems, is that he was accessing all sorts of different material. We've got books on Chechnya, we've got books on Nazi Germany, we've got the looking up of Columbine and other school shootings. So is it just that you didn't mention that he was linked to terror, or is it actually the Al-Qaeda link that you wanted to be exposed?
Here's what we wanted, for those lovely little girls to still be alive today. And that should have been the case, given how much was known to people who were paid by the taxpayer, whose moral obligation it was to ensure that such attacks do not happen. So the reality is, if a suspect or somebody of suspicion is referred to Prevent on 3 separate occasions, and then nothing is done about it, Camilla, this is going to result in atrocities like this happening.
I totally
and one of the reasons
we can both agree. Sorry, we can both. Let's just get this categoric. This man fell through the net, OK? He's referred to Prevent 3 times. He phones Childline and says he wants to kill somebody at school. He actually attacks people at school. He's carrying a knife. His own parents are referring him to Prevent. There is no doubt that he has not been adequately handled by Prevent. What's the point of Prevent if it doesn't prevent stuff like this?
Quite.
But what I'm saying is the problem for Prevent seems to be that they couldn't pin him down to a specific ideology. That is a flaw in the Prevent system, admittedly. What difference does it make what ideology it is that he's following if this guy has got violent tendencies that he's then going to follow through at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class? But was the specific concern that you think that Keir Starmer was hiding terrorism in general or Islamic extremism?
I don't think there's any doubt, if you are an objective observer of the facts, Camilla, that unfortunately there's been an attempt consistently, firstly under the Tories and now under this Labour government, to ensure that this sort of 2-tier attitude that occurs, where certain people with certain immutable characteristics and certain faiths are basically given differential treatment by authorities, and this has consequences.
So you think he was treated differently because he was black?
Well, let me give you a specific example of where this comes to pass. Well, I am answering your question with respect. If you wind back a number of years to another atrocity in this country, at the Manchester Arena, you may remember, and your viewers will remember, there was a security guard who gave testimony, and he said, "I saw the bomber walking into the arena. I was suspicious of him, and I didn't go over to stop him, and I feel terrible now. But you know why he didn't go over to stop him? Because he was afraid of being labelled as racist."
OK, I totally understand that. But in this specific case, are you saying, first of all, that the cover-up of the terror was because of concerns it might be linked to Islamic extremism?
I think
yes or no?
My sense of what has happened, and this is shared by the leadership of our party, is that the catastrophic number of people coming here, both legally and illegally, the failure of people to assimilate effectively, and, frankly, the proliferation of extremist ideology that has been allowed to go, that has been allowed to proliferate by authorities, they would have been concerned that that had the identity and the details of this attack been known, that it would have caused civil unrest. Now, the irony, of course, is by leaving a vacuum...
Detail of the terror, even if it's any terror.
But about the fact of the case, that this man had enough ricin to kill thousands of people, the fact that he had downloaded Al-Qaeda materials. Those are facts of the case that we know.
It's a difficult one, this, isn't it? Because the parents had assimilated, hadn't they? They'd joined a Christian church. They were members of the community. They both worked in the community. So something's failed with this boy. I want to just go back to the point you made. Do you think that people had a hands-off approach, first of all, because he was black, Is that what you're thinking?
I think that the whole of the Prevent programme has been a failure. And I think, look...
Can you just... Sorry, Mr. Youssef, can you answer my specific questions?
Yeah.
Because you're saying a lot. Let's have an adult conversation about this. We don't shy away from these issues on GB News. Do you think that it was handled with kid gloves because he was black?
I think it was handled with kid gloves, and that's your phrase, because the government was afraid, and I think Keir Starmer would have been afraid, that had the details of the horrific details, frankly, of this attack been public at the time, it might have led to civil unrest, which is, by the way, ironic, because by withholding that information from the British public, with respect, let me finish my point.
Do you think he was handled
by withholding the information,
Camilla, or indeed autistic?
By withholding the information from the British public, it left a vacuum,
yes,
which meant that that vacuum inevitably got filled by some actual misinformation.
But
for example, the notion that he'd come here as an illegal immigrant on a boat.
Yeah, but do you think that they withheld the information about the terror because they didn't want them to make the link to Islamic extremism? First of all, Al-Qaeda training manuals. That's my first question. And my second question is specifically, do you think they handled this differently because the teenager at the time involved was a black person?
I have high conviction in the notion that the fact that the Al-Qaeda materials point would have been clearly known by Starmer and many officials at the top of the government and our intelligence agencies, that was not revealed to the public for a very long time, that was a key reason why they withheld
OK,
it.
but
Absolutely.
it would have been highly prejudicial, wouldn't it, before a trial, if he had pleaded not guilty, and he is entitled to a defence like anyone is under the rule of law, had it been known to any future jury that he had been known to the authorities, referred 3 times to Prevent, and all the rest of it. Information about ricin and what he was planning has to come out in court. It can't come out before court, otherwise the court case is prejudiced.
Well, again, there's a few different points here. Firstly, the government's own anti-terrorism czar, right? He came out, actually, and effectively said what Nigel had said was correct, which is by leaving this big gap of this vacuum of information, it leaves... Look, in the world of social media, Camilla, this is not the 1950s and 60s anymore. This information was... actual misinformation might proliferate, and it breeds a tremendous amount of distrust amongst the British people.
Social media might have changed the way that we cover the period between arrest, charge and case.
I think the British people are entitled to be treated like grown-ups.
OK.
That the government should not be infantilising the British people. And, frankly, if you look at cases where similar sorts of situations have happened where, frankly, the perpetrator was of a different demography, a lot of the things you're talking about, the government took a different view to.
Kemi Badenoch's coming in just a minute after you, and you've suggested that she hasn't done enough on transgenderism. Wasn't she one of the Conservatives who has railed against transgender ideology the whole time?
Well, this is one of the interesting things, you know, as you...
Briefly, because
as you look at the Tories, they all want to be graded on a curve. Look, there's no doubt that Kemi Badenoch did take some brave stances with regards to these issues, but she was the equalities... She was, because what I said in my tweet was the Tories were in government for 14 years, during which wokery and poisonous transgender ideology ran rampant throughout our institutions.
You're referring to gender dysphoria diagnoses going up by 50-fold.
What happened with the Tavistock Clinic...
Of all things, is that the thing to attack Badenoch on?
Well,
I mean, she's been gender critical throughout, hasn't she?
The buck stops with the executive. Okay. The only thing that matters ultimately is the result. Look what President Trump did. You know, we still don't have biological sex enshrined in law in this country, despite 14 years of Tory government. Day one of President Trump being in power, what's happened? Albeit with executive order, biological sex is enshrined in law. That should have been done. They had 14 years, and I'm afraid the fact it hasn't been done is a catastrophe for the children of this country.
Zia Youssef, thank you very much. We haven't even got onto the reform poll that puts you on 26 ahead of the Tories and Labour. Can you maintain that by the local elections, do you think?
I think reform has all of the momentum in British politics, and I see no reason why that won't continue.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for joining me today, Zia Youssef, the Reform UK chairman. Coming up next is Kemi Badenoch. You shall pass her as you leave the studio so you can have a chat about the transgender issue directly. She's going to be back in about 3 minutes, so do not move a muscle. See you then.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. A dry start for many of us, but a cloudy start too, and there is some rain on its way, spreading in from the southwest as we go through the rest of this afternoon. So a damp start for Devon and Cornwall and into South Wales this morning. That area of rain pushing its way north and eastwards as we head towards Sunday afternoon. There will be some sunshine across the very far north of Scotland, but that heavy rain arriving across Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England and eastern parts of England by Sunday afternoon. Heavy blustery showers feeding in quite closely behind, but perhaps a little bit milder across the very far southwest. Temperatures here 10 or 11 degrees, but generally around average elsewhere. As we then go into Sunday evening, those heavy and blustery showers continue to feed in from the southwest. These perhaps merging to longer spells of rain at times, although there will be some breaks in those showers as we head through Sunday evening. Longer spells of rain likely though, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England, into southern parts of Scotland too, and perhaps turning to sleet and snow over any high ground here, but generally falling as rain to lower levels. Northern Scotland just holding on to those clearer skies for a time during Sunday evening, but that rain eventually pushes its way northwards through the rest of Sunday and into the start of Monday. So almost anywhere seeing a damp night to come. Further outbreaks of rain then arriving across the very far southeast, pushing northwards again into the early hours of Monday morning. So perhaps some spray on the roads here during Monday morning's rush hour, and heavy blustery showers continuing to feed in from the southwest. So generally a bit of a milder night under all of that cloud and rain. Into the start of Monday then, and low pressure very much in charge of our weather. Heavy blustery showers continue to pile in from the southwest, perhaps emerging to longer spells of rain across northern areas, and perhaps again falling as sleet and snow over any high ground. That brisk southwesterly breeze does bring us milder temperatures than we saw over the weekend. Temperatures a little above average for the time of year, so 10, perhaps 11 degrees in the south and 6 or 7 degrees further north.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, joins me in the GB News studio now. Lovely to see you this morning.
Lovely to see you.
I was just asking Zia Youssef, the chairman of Reform UK, a number of these straight questions, and I can't quite pin down what people are thinking about this Southport killer. We've got complaints by Reform and Nigel Farage that the Prime Minister wasn't honest enough about the fact that this killer was under investigation for terror as well as for the murders and the attempted murders. There seems to be the suggestion that in some way there was a cover-up of the fact that he was looking at Al-Qaeda training manuals. There's some kind of Islamic extremist extent to it. Although if you look at The Sun today, it lists the library of hate that Ruda Cabana was downloading on the internet. It's pamphlets on Nazi Germany, Chechnya, Somalian massacres. What do you think is the nature of the cover-up? Because there's also the suggestion it's been covered up or he was treated differently by the authorities because he was black.
So whenever I see these sorts of comments and the speculation, I always try and put myself in the shoes of the, first of all, the victims. You know, I have 2 daughters.
Yeah.
They love Taylor Swift. The whole thing is just horrifying. Yeah. And the more details that have come out from that sentencing. And you think, what motivates someone to have that level of hatred? And clearly, this is an individual who is not okay. But this was somebody who was looking for a reason to be angry. And so many state bodies were involved, whether it was the Prevent, the schools, social services, mental health. It's like everything wrong was happening with this specific individual. The problem that we have now is that it's no longer 1950 or 1980. And when you leave an information vacuum, then all sorts of things start filling that vacuum. And we need to as politicians, ensure that the public know the truth. And when things can't be said, we explain why. What went wrong, in my view, with Keir Starmer is that his initial reaction was to rush to criticise the people who were worried. And yes, of course, some people committed crimes, but he wasn't worried about prejudicing their trials. He was worried about prejudicing this trial. That's where you see the unequal treatment, and that's where we need to be careful. There's still a lot of information to come. I welcome the inquiry which the Prime Minister has said he's going to have. It needs to go further. It also needs to look at the response immediately afterwards. But with social media, we cannot pretend that we can just answer questions like we did in 1950 and 1980. Don't worry, people, we've got it. This is fine. We've got to do better.
What do you think about the black element? I mean, you've campaigned a lot about you wanting society to be colourblind, to not let... I have no evidence for this, but one perhaps gets the impression, was there a period where people were like, we've got to be careful, this is a young black man, this is a man suffering from autism? Do you think that the public inquiry should probe that? Is that the sense you might be getting from some of this?
If there are, it's actually not in this case. But if there are indications that the response was based on treating people differently because of race, it should absolutely look at that. I think it's actually more that there's too much going on, and the state bodies, whether it's Prevent, even the CPS, they're doing so much they can't cope. And we need to look at resourcing, but also whether there's some things that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. I remember William Shawcross's report that criticised Prevent, and it talked about where the balance of effort was being put. Are people spending a lot of time on the stuff that's actually less likely to go wrong rather than the stuff that's more likely to go wrong? And I think it's a confluence of all of that. I actually think, and this is again this speculation, that mental health is one of those areas that people find tricky to deal with. That this is someone who's suffering from mental health issues. We want to have care in the community. We don't want to immediately institutionalise them. It looks to me like he should probably have been in a mental hospital rather than looked after
elsewhere. Most of the mental hospitals are being closed down in the UK.
But there's still spaces. There are probably people in there who would not do anything as serious as this. And so we need to look across the board at how well we are performing. We set up all these schemes, all these organisations. It's not politicians who run them. And still, people slip through. Now, of course, there'll be many other people who have been caught, which we never hear about. And we mustn't forget that.
Can I also ask you, it's a difficult question, but I'm going to ask it. You've mentioned being a mum. I'm a mum. Should the Southport killers' parents have questions to answer here? You've very much advocated, small state, parental responsibility for their children. We heard Sia Youssef earlier talk about a lack of assimilation of people coming here from abroad. Obviously, the parents are Rwandan. Are there questions for them to answer? And I know that's difficult. They've got into hiding.
It's difficult, but I don't run away from difficult questions. I do think we need to talk about this. This is a family that was given asylum in this country. They were from the ethnic group, I believe, that were the victims of the genocide. He should have been in love with this country. He should have been saying, this is the best country on earth. I say, and the parents, I don't know if they did or not, because that's how I feel. And I didn't even come from, that sort of war-torn asylum background. I came from a middle-class background, and I still see just how special this country is. And I do think that we need to have a broader conversation about integration in this country. It's got to be active, not passive. It didn't matter so much when only a handful of people were coming from nearby countries at a very slow rate. Now, people from all over the place are coming very quickly, and because of technology, they can still keep their heads and their cultures elsewhere. This is dangerous. We need to have a serious conversation about what integration looks like for 2025 and beyond. And it cannot just be what the government should do. Government can't do everything. This is one of the things that frustrates me. The response tends to be, the government should do this, the government should do that. If the government can't do what it's got to do now well, how is it going to do even more well? Society needs to get involved, and that means not just the community neighbours, but parents too.
Nigel Farage has called for Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions, to resign because of the mismanagement of this case. What do you think?
I have not seen evidence that this is a resignation matter. let's see what the inquiry says. I don't think it's helpful simply just calling for every single person to resign every time something's gone wrong. The facts of this have not really been looked at carefully. So how do we know who should or who should not resign? And this is the difference between us and other parties. The Conservatives are about constructive opposition. We are under new leadership now. And it's not just about criticising every single thing. We need to understand what's going wrong and be constructive. Constructive opposition, not destructive opposition.
While you mention new leadership, OK, so we've got one Find Out Now survey putting Reform ahead of the Tories on 26 versus your 23 versus Labour's 22. Then we've got this by Lord Ashcroft's polling company. He's a former Tory treasurer. You will be very familiar with Lord Ashcroft.
I do know Lord Ashcroft. He does lots of good work on polling.
OK, but is this good work? Who would make the best Prime Minister? Keir Starmer, 31%, Nigel Farage, 21%, Kemi Badenoch, 11%. And then who is acting as the most effective opposition? Kemi Badenoch, 14%, Nigel Farage, 26%, no effective opposition, 27%. That's not a great reflection on you and the Tories, is it?
Well, we have to look at where we're starting from. What have we done this year? On rape gangs, we've managed to get the government to move, not to a full inquiry, but now they finally agreed that some inquiries are needed when they said none at all. We've got them to move on that. They're doing disastrous stuff on education. Absolute vandalism on the good work that we have been doing over the last 14 years.
On rape gangs, can you take full credit for that? You could say that GB News and Charlie Peters have pushed them to that position. The survivors have.
Yes, but that doesn't make you the
Tommy Robinson's campaigning.
That doesn't make you the opposition. We were the first to call for a national inquiry, certainly as politicians. Although that was something I remember because it was my birthday.
Should have happened under the Tories.
Well, we had an inquiry. We had a wide-scale inquiry. I thought that was going to come up with more on this,
but it ended up Alexis J one on child abuse.
Yes, but it ended up, it ended up doing something much broader. And after that, we launched a task force. We found 550 perpetrators that hadn't been found before. That shows that more needed to be done. So this work is ongoing. An election slips in between.
Deport those 3 Rochdale abusers. They get stripped of their passport a decade ago, and they're still living there. Most people listening and watching this are tearing their hair out of that kind of stuff. What
Camilla,
are they doing in Rochdale?
I am tearing my hair out, but we're under new leadership. I wasn't there when that was happening. I did the bits that I could do. I heard you talking to Zia about, the Tavistock and the transgender scandals, for example.
Well,
I did that.
Blaming you as Women Equalities Minister for allowing a situation to happen where we had any question at all over whether there are 2 genders or not. Somebody made a point on Twitter. We now have a US president having to say that there are only 2 genders.
Yes,
how did it come to this?
Yes, and this problem has been all over the world. It happened, astronomically, even under Donald Trump. And he is doing what I hope that we will be able to do, which is come back and finish the job.
But it did happen under the Tories.
It happened all over the world.
I know, but
it happened all over the world. We were at the vanguard.
If it happened under left-wing governments, I would understand it. For it to happen under the Conservatives, that we get girls and boys being given puberty blockers, mass mastectomies, and a debate over whether biological sex is mutable or immutable, you're sort of reflecting it, going, how the hell did that happen?
But remember, this was stuff that I was speaking about constantly again and again, and I managed to stop it. Who was it that stopped rapists being put in women's prisons? And this is where we have to look at where society stops and government starts. Many of these things are happening under the radar. We have to do a lot of research. When people went in, they were called transphobes, they were called homophobes. It's very difficult for a lot of people to push through that. I'm not scared of that sort of stuff. I will push through, I will tell the truth and get stuff done. Same thing with postmasters overturning their convictions. I did the tough stuff. And what we're seeing with those numbers is that a lot of people still don't know who I am. They've known Nigel Farage for 20 years. He's been leading not just this party, but many other parties. And when people have just kicked you out, then you need time to regroup. What is astonishing is how badly the government is doing. They have a landslide majority, 140. If 100 Labour MPs went home today, they would still win. That's the situation we're in. And so I've got to make sure that people can see how we're rebuilding trust, that we've acknowledged the mistakes we made, and that we're back on track.
In order to increase your visibility, you could do with being alongside Donald Trump and Elon Musk, arguably.
In what way?
Well, do you want to... You haven't met Donald Trump yet.
No, not yet. I've met the Vice President.
Yes, that's right.
And we have a good relationship, yes.
But, I mean, did you look at the inauguration on Monday with a degree of envy?
No, because Pretty was there, so we had people on our team
just
there.
in terms of him, I appreciate we've got...
And Boris was there as well.
I know.
Yes.
We've got a completely different system. You can't have a Prime Minister signing executive orders on day one like Trump was. But do you look upon it and think... This is proper right-wing leadership, and we've got Starmer for the next 4 years.
Well, I think the fact that we have Starmer for the next 4 years does fill me with dread, because I look at what they're doing on the economy. You know, I heard Rachel Reeves on the TV this morning just saying things that
on this show, by the
simply
way. We had
not,
James Murray on, who couldn't answer
things that
questions,
are simply not true. And I've been going all around the country. I was in Devon this weekend, and businesses are crying out for help.
OK.
They need assistance.
Would you be minded to be more Trumpian?
Well, let's see what he does. He signed, executive orders, things like, biological sex, very easy, very obvious. But look at one area where America is leading on energy costs. We have energy 3 times, 4 times as expensive as they do there. That is not sustainable. If we are going to compete, then we need to get serious.
Well, that means scrapping these arbitrary net zero targets.
Well, it means us looking at the plans that we've got in place. We have too many announcements and no plans. That's one of the mistakes we made as government. Labour's doing it. Reform also doing it.
Yeah.
Too much. The politics across this country is all about talk, but not do.
I tell you what,
so
in terms
I'm
of
going to work on a proper plan that we can deliver.
I tell you, in terms of do, why doesn't the right just coalesce? You're worried about 8 more years of Starmer, not just 4. Why doesn't Reform and the Tories just coalesce?
Because Reform have said that what they want to do is destroy the Conservatives.
I know, but
when
you're both
someone says that,
fighting on the same side.
well, I am being the opposition to Labour. What's interesting is that Reform is spending more time talking about me, like Zia, for instance, saying things that are clearly not true about my record on the issue of transgenderism, puberty blockers, etc. They're not interested in solving problems. It's all about taking us down. That is not constructive.
Okay.
We have to do the job that the British public have given us, being a credible opposition. And people need to know what we're about completely. We've just spent the last year looking at Conservatives arguing. I finally brought unity to the party. The idea that we should bring a whole bunch of people who don't like us and then just unify, it's not that straightforward.
All right, Kemi Badenoch. I feel that there's still time. It's a marathon, not a sprint, this, but let's see. We'll be following it closely on GB News. Thank you for coming into the studio. Great to see you in the flesh. Coming up next, to mark Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow, the journalist and author Wendy Holden will be here to talk about a remarkable story that's covered in her new book, The Teacher of Auschwitz. Back in just a jiffy.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
There's plenty of sunshine on offer for many over the next couple of days in Europe, but there is some heavy rain as well, particularly for parts of Portugal, northern Spain, northwestern parts of France, and some blustery westerly winds as well continuing throughout Monday. Further east, though, there is plenty of sunshine on offer for southern parts of Italy, Greece, Cyprus, seeing plenty of sunshine throughout Monday afternoon. Temperatures here generally in the mid to high teens, with the highest temperatures likely across Tenerife, where we'll see temperatures around 22 or 23.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Newly released MI5 files reveal that Queen Elizabeth II was kept in the dark over the treachery of a senior courtier.
Yeah, for almost a decade. This is Sir Anthony Blunt, who played a double life, passing intelligence, the KGB, during World War II as a senior MI5 officer. But, remarkably, he was allowed to keep his position amid fears of a major scandal if the truth came out.
Well, now those files have been released by the National Archives, which includes the Queen's response to finding out a trusted member like Anthony Blunt was really a traitor.
Well, joining us now in the studio is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Good to see you this morning, Cameron. This is astonishing.
Oh, absolutely. And this wasn't a little spy. This was Anthony Blunt was a full-blown spy. He passed to the Soviets the D-Day deception plans during the Second World War. He was working for MI5, but a double agent for the KGB as well.
The wrong plans.
He passed on the plans.
The wrong ones.
The wrong one in 1944. Yeah. Exactly. But he then got a job inside Buckingham Palace as one of the Queen's most trusted aides and courtiers, the surveyor of her art, essentially like kind of an art advisor for her late Majesty. There was always suspicions about Anthony Blunt way back in the early 50s because he was part of this notorious Cambridge spy ring, a group of 5 boys recruited at Cambridge. 2 of these people fled to Moscow in 1951. Anthony stayed behind in London and subsequently got a job inside Buckingham Palace, and it wasn't until 1964 that he confessed to his treachery. The reason he confessed was because he was granted immunity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. So it's Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow, on Monday. And in the studio joining me now is Wendy Holden, who's a best-selling author, written a number of books about the Holocaust. And this is the latest one. It's called The Teacher of Auschwitz. You can see that there. And it's a fascinating story, this, Wendy, one that hasn't been told before. First of all, before we go into what this is about, how did you find out about this chap, Freddy Hirsch, who's the subject of this book?
I was working with a previous Holocaust survivor called Zuzana Ruzhishkova in Prague. She'd survived 3 camps as a teenage musical prodigy with her mother, and an incredibly harrowing story. She emerged from it weighing about 6 stone, and she'd lost everybody in her family apart from her mother. She was very emotional, obviously, during the course of our interviews, but when she spoke about Freddy Hirsch, her entire face came alive. She lit up as if lit from within, just full of joy and hope. And I thought, my goodness, how is this possible?
Yeah.
And she spoke about him giving her some of the happiest days of her life in the middle of Auschwitz.
So tell us how he did that. He is a remarkable man. It's surprising nothing's been written about him before. Tell us about him.
Well, he was young and gay and German, and he fled from Aachen not more than a child himself in Germany. He went to Czechoslovakia. He thought that was far enough. Of course, it wasn't. But immediately he set to helping the children. He'd been a youth leader. He'd been a fantastic athlete. He had dreams of becoming an Olympian, which he might have done if Hitler hadn't banned all German Jews from being in the Olympics team. And so he started to take care of the children, initially physically, lots of physical well-being, exercise, fresh air, and then it went far deeper. He became much more concerned about their mental health. He even taught them meditation. We think of that being such a modern-day thing. And he took care of them first in the ghetto. He persuaded the SS to move the children out of the overcrowded barracks into Kinderheim, special homes. He persuaded them to let them go out onto the ramparts of the ghetto and get fresh air and exercise. He begged for more food, better clothing, a little bit more thicker soup. And
How did he do that?
things.
Because you would imagine that the average SS officer had little truck with a well-educated... I mean, obviously, he would have been keeping his sexuality secret
Very
at
much
that
so,
time.
yes.
But, gay guy who is trying to make the conditions for children in ghettos better, you wouldn't think there was any sympathy for that position at all.
No, you wouldn't. I think what it was, he was so beautiful. They had a great respect for the Aryan look, if you like. And he was an athlete. He stood up to them. So when everybody else in the ghetto and then later in Auschwitz was drawn in on themselves, the last thing you wanted to do was to attract attention or catch the eye of a member of the SS. But he stood up to them and he saluted them and he clicked his heels and he said, I need this, I need that. And he demanded things from them and they almost respected him for that.
So brave, though.
Unbelievably
because it could
brave.
have ended horribly for him. They could have thought, this guy's just a thorn in our side.
Yes. There were several occasions when he very nearly would have just been shot dead by somebody who thought he was impudent and arrogant, and what on earth was he doing demanding all these things.
How did he apply what he had been doing in the ghettos to Auschwitz then? How did it come about? And again, how did he persuade the concentration camp guards to go along with it?
It was extraordinary because he only went to Auschwitz from Terezin, the ghetto, because he defied orders to go and see a group of children, 1,500 children who'd been brought in on a train who were in despicable condition. And he went to try to help them and he got caught, so he got sent to Auschwitz. And the minute he got there to the family camp, the Czech family camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau, he set up the same thing. He persuaded them to have a children's block. And the reason was they were standing out in this freezing cold, wet clay every morning and night for roll call. And these little 4- or 5-year-olds didn't understand. They were running between people's legs. They were causing disruption. And so he said, let me take the children inside. Let me do the roll call and count them for you, and you can just deal with the adults. And it started like that. And then he said, may I have a little wood for a fire? There were no fires in any of those blocks or barracks. He got a fire. May I have a few extra vegetables? Can we have clothes from the clothing bank, which was called Canada, that had been taken from people who'd been gassed?
And also, people listening to this might be thinking, well, how long did children actually remain in the camp? You know, we associate the first people in the queue for the gas chambers to be women and their children, seen as an inconvenience to the Nazis. So were these children that had somehow been the so-called lucky ones? I appreciate they're then subject to the most appalling conditions, but how did they remain?
Yes, well, the SS had been to Terezin, the Red Cross had been to Terezin to check on it, and they had humanised Terezin in an enormous way. They sent all the people that looked poorly to the gas chambers, brought all new people in, gave them food, put flowers in vases and things. I mean, they made it extraordinary, and filmed the Red Cross coming, and they were completely duped into thinking it was fine. The Red Cross then said that they were going to come to Auschwitz. So they set up this family camp for the same purpose, that if the Red Cross came. So they didn't have to shave their heads. They could wear their own clothing. And for a period, it was supposed to be a better place to be. But of course, thousands died of typhus and starvation and malnutrition and diseases.
So
but
Freddy
he was able to
Hirsch
keep them.
is able to just try and make an appalling situation just slightly better for some of these children. And what's interesting is that you say in the book that it got to the point where actually some of the SS guards were coming into this room with makeshift sort of Disney posters up and an environment of a degree of, you know, tranquility compared to the rest of the place, if you can even call it that. And they were seeking refuge there.
They were. He had a young artist paint Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the walls of this drab block. And he had people had made little wooden toys. And he had teachers who were prisoners in the camp come in and teach them. They had no pen and paper. They were teaching by storytelling. And they taught them songs. And they decided to put on little shows. And one by one, these SS officers would drift in. And they were married. They had children at home, many of them. And they saw these children and they would sit and watch these shows weeping. And the awful part was they would then go outside and send another 8,000-10,000 people to their deaths,
including
men, women and children.
To the gas chambers.
And yet they were coming in and playing with these children. Even Joseph Mengele came in. He told the children to call him Uncle Pepe.
The other reason as well, Hirsch spoke very good High German, and that's why he had some respect in the camp.
Yes, very much so. It was really... he worked the system. And the sad part about it is that because he did all this later on, and the reason his story really hasn't been told, was that he was denigrated by the communists who took over that part of the world because they said that he had been a collaborator with the Nazis.
OK. Wendy, we need to leave it there, but here's your book, The Teacher of Auschwitz. It's a really compelling story, and it's got quite the ending that we're not going to spoil now, but it's well worth a read. Wendy, thank you very much. As I say, it's Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow on Monday. I shall be back next week at 9:30 as ever, and of course up next at 11 o'clock as usual it's Michael Portillo, so stay tuned for his show and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Lovely to be with you today.
This is the...
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. I hope that your Burns Night celebrations will not impair your